Welcome to the Global Marketing Show, where we explore how language and culture impact global business. I'm Wendy Pease, your host and president of Rapport International. Let's get started. Hello, listeners of the Global Marketing Show. Thank you for coming to listen to another episode. And as you know, the podcast is brought to you by Rapport International. And each episode, we have a fun tidbit brought to you by Rapport International. And this one's kind of fun. In the news this month, we've heard a lot about the Peanuts comic strip because it turned 75 years old on October 2nd. So in honor of the Peanuts birthday, I'm bringing you a tidbit about them. The Peanuts comic at its peak was published in 2,600 newspapers across 75 countries, and it was translated into 21 different languages. And we know it as peanuts, which is an English slang for little kids. But in some countries, the comic strip was known as radishes because that's an equivalent slang in Denmark and in some South American Spanish-speaking countries. So happy birthday, peanuts or radishes. Today's guest is Alain Tranchemontagne, and I'm very excited to talk to him as he has over 30 years of medical device experience spanning startups to Fortune 50 organizations. He's led teams across 5 continents, and he's held commercial and general management positions. He brings significant global experience in the areas of product and market development. He's presently CEO of Alleviate. So Alain, welcome to the Global Marketing Show.
Thank you for having me, Wendy. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, I'm very excited for this conversation. So you've worked in 5 continents. What do you think your favorite country has been to work in?
It's an interesting question because there's so many great countries. I don't know that I could single out a single one, but I would say from a topography standpoint, there's just sheer beauty of the country. I would pick Switzerland as my absolute favorite, with a close second being Taiwan, which is a very similar topography. From a cultural standpoint, I really, really enjoyed Thailand, spent a lot of time there. And the close second would be Malaysia, even though it's a very, very different country.
And so what was it about Thailand that you liked so much culturally?
The Thais are gentle people. They're always smiling. I'm overstating it perhaps, but they're very smiling. Their approach to everything is peaceful. And so I found them very engaging and really pleasant to work with. So can't say enough good about Thailand.
And how about Malaysia?
Malaysia is very different. So Malaysia is the amalgamation of the Malays, the Chinese, and the Indians, and they've learned to coexist together peacefully, and which should be a model for all of us.
Yeah. Yes, I was in Malaysia a couple years ago, and I found the same thing. I mean, the languages, the religions, the cultures, they were all celebrated and appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fabulous group.
Accepted. Yeah. I'm headed to Thailand later this year. So looking forward to meeting the people there. Any recommendations of what to see?
Well, Bangkok, obviously, because Bangkok is such a interesting place. Ayutthaya is a beautiful, it used to be the capital of the country. So it's further south on the river. And then there's a number of islands that if you're going on vacation, would be wonderful places to visit. So, there's a lot of really fantastic places.
Okay. So you did get out a little bit out and around rather than just working.
Yeah, I actually, to be honest, I only worked, but one day my wife came for a long weekend. So we did spend 3 days on one of the islands, Koh Samui.
Koh Samui. Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. So tell me about your background. Like, how did you get started in global business?
Interestingly enough, so the first company I worked for in the medical device sector in 1994, actually, that ages me, was a company based in Australia, part of the Pacific Dunlop Group. And they had me turn around their Canadian operations, which at the time, obviously, I was born in Canada and raised in Canada, so it wasn't international. But from the perspective of an Australian, it was an international assignment. And then they moved me to the US in 96, and I've been here ever since. But that got me into essentially a template where I would take on a turnaround task, and there would generally be, international components to it. I went, from there to a startup that was based in Belgium. That took me to Thailand. That's how I became well acquainted with Thailand. And then I went to Tyco Healthcare. Again, same thing. I took on their wound care business on a global scale, had to, ramp up the business in a number of areas. So, and it's the model that keeps repeating itself every 2 to 3 years for the rest of my life.
So we're going to break that down because there's so much richness in there. So this company from Australia comes in and they have a presence in Canada, it sounded like, because you said it was kind of a turnaround. So what was the first thing that you had to do? I mean, Australians are very different than Canadians, and you've got a company that's struggling, and so how did you assess it, and what did you do?
The Australians are not that different. I mean, interestingly
Yeah.
enough, they're an old colony of the UK. They're still part of the Commonwealth. So from that standpoint, there's a number of commonalities. To be fair, I reported into a US general manager who oversaw all the Americas. And so there's obviously a close proximity between Canadians and Americans. So that was the easy part, if you will. That was an easy transition. We were on the same time zone. Assessing the business, you're right. That was the first step, is what is working and what's not working. And what wasn't working is they were approaching the business from a Me Too strategy when they were a sixth market share player. And so we looked at the business, and actually that was the first time I ever developed what we commonly call a KOL. So built a business founded on one leading thought person. So person that could influence the general customers I was aiming it for. So not rocket science, and then I built from there a
Okay, so
sales and a
hang on.
marketing.
So KOL, you're talking
Key
about
opinion leader,
key
sorry.
opinion leader. Okay, I just want to make sure we were both. Okay, so that was the start of finding somebody who could really be a key.
Promote, yeah. Yeah, speak with knowledge and credibility, which I wouldn't, because I'm running the business. So therefore I have, my salary comes from the business, so I lose credibility with professionals, where she could actually act on our behalf, but she had to obviously buy into the business, and then build a sales and marketing organization around that.
So she was Canadian. She was a local person.
Correct.
Would she have worked in other countries too, or did you find like?
She did some work in the US, but it was largely a Canadian-based person at that time.
And how do you find a key opinion leader that's going to be successful?
Read journals, read everything you can, because you see names pop up from time to time, and you're going to see a lot of names that are common, across different publications, across different journal articles, etc. But they're not all available. Some of them are already working with another organization. So you have to find the one that A, is going to be available, and B, will actually believe in your product. They have to believe in your product. Otherwise, people will see right through that.
And then do you bring them on as an employee, or do they continue doing what they're doing? And
yes, they continue to do what they're doing, but they become part of what I would call today, I didn't back then because I didn't know any better, but my clinical advisory board.
okay. And then are they paid?
They're paid on an hourly basis, so they're basically consultants. So if they do, let's say that, and it was mostly education based, which is usually what we see in the field of medical device. So if she would give a talk, let's say, then I would pay her for prep time and delivery. transportation if there was, you know.
Okay, so your sales model really was structured on hold an education event and invite all the
Local
prescribers or
participants, yeah,
users or physicians.
correct.
Okay, and then they would come to the dinner and hear your key opinion leader speak.
Correct. And, then there's a Q&A session, and then that leads usually to some of these people inviting me to meet with them and their staff. And that's why I had to build a sales organization, because otherwise I'd be traveling the country nonstop.
Okay, all right. And so then you build a sales organization. So you had to hire a bunch of salespeople that would be able to do that.
Yeah.
That is one of the hardest hires ever is finding good salespeople. And you've
Yeah.
done it all over the world. So
Mm.
let's start with how did you do it successfully here? And then we'll get into the cultural stuff.
So the first time I did, because I had very little experience doing so, I actually found one person who would be my sales manager. He was a hired hand, so what we call in 1099 in the US, as opposed to a W-2, which would be an employee, a paid salaried employee. And he ended up leading the charge to find the people. So he had a network around the country. I would use the same model in the future when say I went to Thailand. I had to find somebody who would, because I don't speak Thai. Many Thais speak English, but it's not the same. You can't necessarily get to all the people. So I found myself in many countries identifying a lead person who would act as sort of like my sales head, if you will. But in Canada, even though I was local, because I didn't have experience at that point in time, this was my first medical device world job, I ended up hiring this gentleman.
Okay. And so how did you, without much experience, you got to bring somebody in that you're gonna then trust to find good salespeople.
Well, yeah, I did interview all of them. I did a lot of ride-alongs where we would make sales calls together, which allowed me two things. First of all, was to help steer the development of marketing material because I could see what was a gap between the physician and the rep, or I should say the clinician, because it's not all physicians. It could be PTs, PAs, RNs, you name it. And then, building the bridge for what they need to be effective in their sales exercise. And so one of the things I should add is you have to be ready to terminate people very quickly. Back then, I was a little more lenient. Today, if it's not working within 3 months, I change.
Oh, okay. So 3 months is the magic number to see what are you seeing there? Business closed or business activity?
Well, that depends on if you're in a surgical application, business close is unlikely because it takes usually 6 to 9 months to close a piece of business, but it's the activity level, it's the engagement with physicians. In the case of surgery, we talk about physicians, obviously. So there's a number of different measures that I will look for. A lot of it is done through engagement with the rep, but much of it is also doing joint calls early on. And as you scale your business, as you bring on internal employees, you then delegate that portion of the task to these people. But initially, if you're a startup, if you're the only person in sales, that's where you end up spending your time.
Okay, so you do this in Canada, and then you figured out how to do this, or you had the
In the US, yeah.
opportunity in the US to do this across the world. What's different in the different cultures?
Well, so there's a number of avenues. In the US, like I said, the cultural differences are not that great. People like to talk about the differences, but the fact is, if you immerse yourself in the local culture, it's not that big a difference. So the beauty about the US also is that we had, because of the size and scale of the US market, we had a much larger organization, whereas in Canada, that's pretty much it initially. When I went to Thailand, which again, we're going to keep using Thailand for now because it's a convenient model. That was more perhaps the biggest departure from the Canadian experience. In Thailand, I had to figure out, well, first of all, where is Bangkok? Because I had never been. Secondly, figure out where do I stay when I come here? How do I travel? How do I communicate to people? And you know, all of these factors. You develop. Hotels are a fabulous resource. There's also a lot of information online that you can get nowadays. Back then, there wasn't, but you could, network. But network is key. And I mentioned it earlier, is finding a few good people you can work with. Obviously, people with linguistic skills that you can work with. And that was my first step, landing in Thailand. The company was a small startup company. There were a couple of people, Belgians both, established in Ayutthaya. And so they brought me in, and I started to network, eventually found a person. Poshara was his name, and he helped me network through other contacts, and it's essentially the same process except you're working one step removed.
Oh, okay. See, I've heard a lot of things about salespeople are compensated very different. They have different kind of work structure around them, different expectations across the countries. But what you're saying is really you find a good person that's going to understand the sales culture, and then you trust them.
Correct. To provide guidance. It's not just who you're going to hire. It's what, if you go through an interview and you're both, remember, I speak French first. So I was like talking in English, and these people may have been speaking Thai naturally, and now they're speaking in English. So we've got two levels of translation going on. So you do have to trust your local partner. And again, you have to make those decisions fairly quickly. Why? Because if they're taking you down the wrong path, it's going to be a lot more costly the deeper you go down this path.
So you have to make quick decisions on letting somebody go if you're seeing that it's not working, and
Correct.
quick decisions on who to bring in because you're not moving it forward.
Correct. And nowadays, and there may have been at the time, but I didn't come across them. There are many people who are, say, you may be able to find an American established in Japan, for example, who serves that purpose. He or she has decided to relocate and offers their services to local U.S. businesses who want to expand. I'm picking Japan as an example, but it exists in all forms of regions and territories.
What's one of the most difficult situations you ever ran into?
There's a fun one. At one point, you start to think you know what you're doing, and so I did, like most people. And one day, I decided that I could travel on my own in China. Plane lands. We're in a 777, and as we're running down the tarmac, I noticed there's a lot of military planes around, and I'm like, oh, this is odd. But, and then the 777, which is a big plane, makes a U-turn on the grass. I've never seen this. I've never seen it before. I'd never seen it, and I've never seen it since. And then they park at the airport, and I walk into this airport, and we're used to airports around the world, international airports, I might add, that have dual linguistic offers, at the very least, local language and English.
Yeah.
That did not happen in that airport. It was pure Chinese. And it took me 4 hours to realize that I was actually in the wrong airport to pick up my next flight. So you had to get out of the airport and walk to another airport, which was not very far, but you don't know that when you pretend to be a local and you're smart and you're not so smart. So, it's a small thing, but you have to understand that if I had missed my connection, luckily I had a very long connection. If I'd missed my connection, I'd not be stuck in a place where no one speaks English. Like I tried to talk to 20 people and no one spoke a lick of English. I I don't know how long it would have taken for me to find a hotel, park myself book another flight, whatever. So it was an interesting. So small details matter, and you learn that once you start to realize you're not so smart. Just get help. Find people who can work with you. Get a guide. I've done that, by the way, more than once. So I wasn't that smart. I just made the mistake several times.
Yeah. Yeah, that must have been quite scary. 4 hours trying to figure out how to get to the right place. And not,
Not knowing that I had to get it to another airport. It was like serendipity. Another story for another day, but
did you ever figure out why the plane did the U-turn on the grass?
they only had one runway and like no secondary. Like they were, it was a military local airport. So the jets could just turn around, you know. And what I didn't realize, I was booked on a local only flight going into a local airport, and the international airport was essentially across the street.
And you had to walk over there, right?
Yeah, once you walk into the other airport, there's English everywhere. But like I said, small detail, but I could have been stuck for a week there not knowing, you know.
So, yeah, that's a great story. And how about one of your biggest successes?
I would say convincing people in other parts of the world that we were a team. You know, when I hired, I talked about Malaysia earlier. When I hired a team in Asia for Ansell, Ansell was the Australian company. Pacific Dunlop was the ownership. I ended up pulling people together from various countries, Thailand, obviously, Malaysia, China, Japan. It's not obvious for someone who grew up in North America, spent the first 30 years of his life in North America, to figure out how to get these people to work together as a team. And it was super satisfying because they were knocking it out of the ballpark in terms of success once we got this to gel. And I still interact with them on a regular basis.
What are some hints that you can say that work? Because that's really rough to do, build a
Um,
cultural team.
well, once we started to, well, there's two dimensions, right? One, there's the team dynamics. Originally, you start to bring people on, and it's a little awkward, and you get them together, and there's this awkwardness at scale, if you will, because you know it's no longer just one to one, but it's now 20 people. Um, but then you start to see people start to collaborate and interact and support each other. So the guy from Japan gets a call from the guy in China, say, can you come and help me? And, you know, so that team dynamic was fabulous to see. But then you start to see also the commercial results where the sales are picking up when all of a sudden you're growing 150% and you're, wow, it's working. And, you know, and so those two dimensions ran in parallel. As the team gelled, the sales grew. As the sales grew, the team gelled, if you will. There's a reinforcement, right? The satisfaction of seeing the performance.
I understand that. And I am fascinated by leadership. I've been watching some things go on at Penn State recently because the head coach just got fired and they're bringing in an interim. And so you're like, I get that if you get the team to work along well together, and if they call out and reach out to each other for help, like the revenues will go up. There's something you're doing in your leadership role that helps bring them together. Can you give us kind of your philosophy or your, like your strategy and your tactics,
Yeah.
how you might encourage them?
So on a day-to-day basis, I would argue that I lead from behind, meaning I let them set the direction and I'll coach through the process, but I don't tell them what to do. The only time I step into that role, and we'll take the pandemic as an example. When the pandemic hit, I was less than a year in at Hydrocision, and you had to take a directive approach. So that's the only, it's the rare circumstance when a crisis occurs where you need to take ownership. And I remember doing this with a board, also like telling the board, this is what we're going to do. This is what the forecast is going to be. This is what's going to happen. And people will appreciate that. But on the general day-to-day, you have to allow them to help you set the direction, if you will. That's what I call leading from behind.
And then do you do that one-on-one or in a group meet? Like you were talking earlier about there were 20 people on the team. Do you pull 20 people together? and have them discuss that, or?
Well, you have to do it one-on-one and as a group. I mean, if you operate differently with a group and individually, then it's not going to work. So, if I remember having a meeting, a overall sales and marketing meeting in Malaysia. You pull the strengths of everybody together and get them to create, if you will, the strategy. Like I said, you coach it, and I still use that. Back then, I don't know that I realized what I was doing. It
Yeah.
was just, this is how I do it, period. Today, I'm very focused on this. In fact, I coach racetrack instructors. So I race cars, and, I still do that as a going practice. But now it's become a self-awareness, but it took me 30 years to get there.
Okay, so earlier in the podcast, you mentioned that you didn't have a formula when you first started out, but now it's a formula. So can you walk us through your formula that you've developed over those 30 years?
Well, sure. And I'll call it in broad steps. The first few weeks is I just meet people, listen to what they have to say, and absorb as much content as I can. At Alleviate, for example, it was like pulling all the patient data, getting all the literature, getting all the material, talking to as many customers. I talked to patients, I talked to physicians, to understand what is it that this business has. What do people recognize or appreciate about the business? What do people see as challenges? You have to understand both sides. You can't ditch the good while you're trying to fix the not so good. And so I usually give myself 1 to 3 months to start to digest this. And then at that point in time, start to interact with people in terms of proposing ideas, not forcing ideas like I mentioned earlier, but rather saying, hey, what if we did this? What if we did that? In fact, I've got a call at 12:30 today, where we're going to go through some of that. In fact, setting objectives with the team. So, that's step 2. And then once you start to see results, and so that's the third phase, because, at that point in time, you're still just in the early execution. And the third phase is to start to pick up the pieces that are working. So that becomes more analytical in nature. So I tend to dive back into data, but different data. The original data was, how is the business going based on the metrics that we currently use? This is, how is the business doing with the metrics I want to use? And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm 6 months in the job and at Alleviate, and just employing the same process. Once the business starts to move in the right direction, it's a matter of, having a set of longer term objectives. You let the team run the day-to-day planning, and you focus on, how do I extend this play?
What analytics do you always do you put the same ones in every company?
Well, there's always some obvious ones, right? You want sales, you want velocity, you want growth, you want acceleration. But every one of them is going to have different components. So can you measure patient satisfaction? Can you measure physician satisfaction? Can you measure repeat use? These are all, so every business is going to have a little bit of difference, but I'm a firm believer in something I call data density, which means I want a lot of data, because N of 1 doesn't mean much, if you will. You can always have a great patient outcome. You can always have a super happy physician, but that doesn't mean they're all happy. They're all super, satisfied. So you got to accumulate a lot of data. So frequently I find myself, and I remember a gentleman named Nino Gilardi who had, chastised me back at Tyco Healthcare, because I was looking at the data on a daily, if not more, basis. And he was like, why do you do this? Like, it's too detailed. And I was like, because that immersion is what makes me appreciate the business. I could see patterns through the chaos, if you will, of general data. And so I've learned to really grasp a business through the data, as well as, talking to people, but you tie the two together. So data density is my go-to. I need to build anything that the company can deliver in great amounts.
Huh.
That makes any sense?
Yeah, that's fabulous, and it was very well said. Tell us about Alleviate now. What are you doing now?
Alleviate is the continuation of the last 17 years of my life. So I started in sports medicine at Smith and Nephew, where I ran their sports medicine worldwide, and a lot of stories about the international component there. And from there, which was all surgical, hardcore surgical. We're talking about, you tore your ACL, you're going to have to go in and drill holes in the bone and et cetera. So very, very heavy surgery, to hydrocision, which I joined actually in the Q1 of 2019. That's why I said within a year, the pandemic hit, and with an interesting life for a while, because it was just a tiny company. Every dollar mattered. And so there were many sleepless nights, but it was the expansion of what I'd lived at Smith and Nephew in the hardcore surgery. This was, I'll call it the light core surgery, meaning it was a very small procedure, took 5 minutes to repair or help the body repair damaged tendon, chronically damaged tendon ligament. They're all the same. We spent 6 years building that business, and now it's like in great shape. The next phase, I keep regressing perhaps, but now Alleviate tries to prevent surgery. So we go into the conservative care. So you show up at your doctor and you say, my elbow hurts. And the doctor says, well, you have tendonitis. Okay, how do you deal with this? Because once it's chronic, it's immensely difficult to deal with. Right. Because it's considered a repeat injury. And so people tend to not stop doing what they're doing for 9 months, which is in general the time it takes to heal a tendon fully. And so what Alleviate has developed is a set of products and processes to guide the recovery of the damaged tendon so that the patient can avoid surgery, if you will. So essentially, I've gone from hardcore surgery to light core surgery to no surgery. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that it's a US-based company now. Mm-hmm. And from our pre-call, I think you were talking about, like, the opportunity in the global world. What are the things you're doing now to set yourself up for the global markets?
The first thing is to understand where are we going to go first, because then that triggers we got to pay attention to legislations and changes, regulatory, you name it. So once you understand which countries, you can start to focus on the second part, which is understanding the regulatory landscape and the evolution, the data requirements, right? We're in healthcare, so data is important. And then you got to start to think about your IP strategy. Mm-hmm. Trademark and IP combine, if you will, because it's extremely expensive to support an IP portfolio as well as a trademark portfolio. So you have to be judicious and say, which countries am I going to enter? And there's no company outside of the big companies that can afford to protect every asset they have everywhere around the world. So that's the segmentation, if you will. Once you've got that in place, once you are ready and you've got the financials, and you're on your way to building out the regulatory strategy, the market entry, if you will, then you got to start to build a commercial end. Not before that, because before that you wouldn't know what to focus on.
Right, exactly. Another thing that you said on the when we were talking before we started recording is that when you're talking about going into other marketing, translation looks deceptively simple, but it'll bite you if you do it wrong.
Yeah, true story. Yeah. Let me share with you one true and semi-funny story. Semi-funny, again, I think I'm too smart sometimes. At Hydrocision, the previous company I ran, we had a piece of equipment, electronic piece of equipment that controlled the device. And it was designed with Europe and the US and Latin America and Asia in mind. So it had all sorts of languages. Of course, it was only programmed in English at that point in time. So I figured, I could probably do the French version. No way. And I found out the hard way that they had actually done the same sort of thing with a friend of a friend who spoke Spanish. And so they'd programmed the Spanish aspect, which I don't speak Spanish. So it's like, no, get professionals, because we're talking about regulatory elements. We're talking about clinical and technical language. This is not, hey guys, let's go have a beer. And so it's really deep in knowledge. And I speak French fluently, obviously, but I'm not clinical or technical in any nature when it comes to French. So, yeah, get a professional.
That's such an awesome story because you've been in the industry for years. You're fully bilingual English French, but for you to sit down and try to do the translation, I mean, it's not worth your time to do because you've got all the other things going on. But how difficult! I mean, that's such respect for the translators that do this work.
Yeah, yeah. No, I actually just looked at it and gave up. You talk about the time. I think I wasted 5 minutes because I started to read the stuff and I was like, "There's no way I can do this."
Yeah, yeah,
Not professionally anyway.
right, yeah. What advice would you have for people going international?
Love cultures. Embrace whatever you come across. Don't fear it. Go into it with both feet, and just live it. I couldn't wait to get on an airplane when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Now travel has got old, but I couldn't wait, and it was fun.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. All right, we're coming towards the end, and I've set you up for this, or gave you warning that I like to ask our guests, what's your favorite foreign word?
You're gonna laugh, but my favorite foreign word is an English word. For you, it's not, but it's theoretically.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, yeah, to me is such a fantastic sounding word. It's got rhythm, it's got pace. I love that word. I've loved this word forever. I knew you would laugh. I knew you would laugh.
It's great. Theoretically, rhythm.
Yeah.
We need to find an artist to write a song about that.
Today I might say asymptote is kind of cool, but if we talk about English, but theoretically is definitely up there.
Is it anything about the meaning, or it's purely the sounds of it?
It's purely the sound of it. It's got rhythm. It's got nice flow between vowels and consonant. It's not like Tranchemontagne, which I used to hate when I was a kid.
What say that again?
I said which I used to hate. I used to hate my name when I was a kid because it's too different. And
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah. And so that's why I said, yeah. And it's
Oh,
very guttural, right? Tranchemontagne, very guttural.
yeah.
Yeah. Not very pretty.
Oh, well, see, for me, it's French. So I think French is a beautiful language. So
Mm.
Tranchemontagne, but montagne, it's
Mm.
hard for my mouth to make the correct sounds. But
No worries, you're doing well.
yeah, how do you say theoretically in French?
Théoriquement.
Theoretically, yeah, so it doesn't flow as much.
No, no, no. The ma is kind of like boring.
I absolutely love that question because, foreign is any language to any person it
Mm.
could be. And so I've heard some really good ones. All right. How can people reach you if they'd like to connect with you?
It's ALAIN as in Norman at Alleviate Therapy in one word.com.
Okay. Yeah. And so we'll be watching Alleviate Therapy because it sounds like it'll be doing great things and going internationally very soon. So
Hopefully.
thank you so much for taking the time today. I know you're really busy and have a lot going on. So I appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom.
Thank you for having me and make this an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And so, listeners, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Remember to give us a 5 or follow us if you want to hear the future episodes coming out. We've got some good guests coming up in the future. So, hopefully, they'll be as insightful as Alain was. We'll talk to you next time. Au revoir.
Cheers. Au revoir.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Global Marketing Show. We started this podcast to capture the stories of people who do global marketing and work for companies that export, since those companies have higher revenues, higher profits, higher valuations, higher salaries, and more stability, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a review and subscribe. And if you know somebody who would be a good guest, introduce them to me, your host, Wendy Mackenzie Pease. If you'd like to learn more about global marketing or language translation and interpretation, visit Rapport International's Resource Center at www.rapport translations.com. Au revoir. Hasta luego. Ciao for now.